Good evening, and welcome to Arundel Camera Club's live stream for Wednesday, October 14th, 2020. My name is Christine Milliker, and I'm the program's chair for the 2020-2021 season. The Arundel Camera Club was founded in 1957 and exists to promote the art, science, and education in all aspects and fields of photography. Normally, we meet at 7 p.m. every Wednesday evening during the school year in Severna Park, Maryland. However, with the current disruptions, we've decided to continue business as normal in a virtual space, which allows us to protect our members and guests from the current COVID-19 situation. For more information about us, please visit www.arundelcameraclub.org. Before we get to tonight's topic, we have a few upcoming schedule items to cover. October 17th is our field trip to Spokore Windmill in Cambridge, Maryland. We will also be going to Blackwater Wildlife Preserve, which is $3 per car, and later in the evening to a tractor pull in Tuckahoe, which is $10 per person. Look for an email from Michelle for more details. On October 21st is our digital color and monochrome contest. The theme is patterns. Lewis asks that all submissions be turned into him by noon on Saturday, October 17th, which is earlier than our normal time, as he is going out of town and needs to have everything organized. On October 22nd, we are having a fundraiser at Brian Buru's in Severna Park. The fundraiser, an email was sent out about the fundraiser and with the menu. Please share this information with your friends and family. Each meal for a 3-course meal is $25, $10 of which comes back to our club. And the food there is really good, so feel free to invite all you want. If people aren't comfortable to eat in the restaurant, then you can order online and pick it up curbside and take it home. And we still get our share of the proceeds from the fundraiser for your meal. On October 29th, we have a program. Steve Hain is giving a program on reproduction photo cases, making a modern-day antique with a history of daguerreotypes and wet plate photo cases, and now how he has been recreating these beautiful antiques for modern practitioners. And then on November 4th is our photo assignment for the month of October, which is board games and card games, and we will be discussing everyone's photos. Those photos need to be turned in by October 28th. Sorry, I was wrong. It's 28th is Wednesday, not Thursday. By 6 p.m. And we ask that everyone turn in 3 photos for our photo assignment. Now let's get started with our program for tonight. Tonight we have Don Rosenberger here to discuss abstract photography. Don describes himself as just a guy who loves to make images. His love of photography began when he was a teenager. Along with his passion for cars, Don would often be seen at the starting line photographing drag races on the weekends. After a while, the cost of photography grew to be too much and Don stopped taking pictures. Fortunately, the arrival of digital photography reignited his love for photography, and it has been his driving passion ever since. It is the constant desire to improve his craft and elevate the quality of his work that keeps Don growing as an artist. In 2013, Don co-founded the very successful Roadrunners photography tours, leading photo tours domestically and internationals with RRPT was an incredible experience. In 2019, Don decided to leave RRPT and spend more time working on his art and building his own brand. He also runs the Fairfax and DC metro area photography meetup group, where he organizes different photography opportunities where photographers of all skill levels can get together and explore places, develop skills, and meet other photographers. Don's impressive body of work, his blog, and current workshop offerings can be found on his personal website, www.donrosenberger.com. And let's welcome Don.
Hi, thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me, see me? This is a little different because I don't see anybody else on my screen.
Yeah, it's I'm following all the comments over
Okay.
on Facebook, and I will let you know. Everything
Okay.
looks good on this side, okay?
All right. So I'm ready to share my screen. Is that, let's see.
Yeah. Go ahead and
Okay.
hit share screen.
All right. Entire screen. There we go. How's that?
Oops. Go ahead and pull up your presentation. There we go.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. Thanks, everybody. Tonight I'm going to talk about abstract photography. It's probably one of my favorite types of photography, and it's often something you can use when maybe a certain scene's just not talking to you or speaking to you. Move your camera around. Like you guys, I've been members of camera clubs for a long time. I'm not currently a member of any particular club, but I used to help manage Nature Visions, which is a wonderful event that they hold every November in Prince William County in Virginia. Highly recommend it. As mentioned, I was a founding partner at Roadrunner Photography Tours. Currently, I'm assisting KS Fine Arts with their international workshops. As soon as we can start going international again, KS Fine Arts is a portrait photography operation. So rather than just, last year we went to Tuscany, there's like 10, 12 photographers, and I took like 4 of them out one morning for sunrise. Unfortunately, that was all the group wanted to do. So portrait photographers do not like to get up early, I guess. And little joke, Art Wolf almost called me God on stage at Nature Visions, and it was because of my deep booming voice, and it kind of came around behind him, and it was a fun moment. So anyway, as mentioned, I have my own meetup. It's called Fairfax and DC Area Photography Meetup. If you want to join, if you're not already a member, I'd welcome you to do so. And hopefully when this COVID thing gets a little more under control, we can start doing a lot of things. It's been a pretty slow year, and certainly a lot slower than I would like. But anyway, so tonight, what to expect? Unfortunately, I'm not qualified to give anybody a lesson in art history, but I hope I show you some new things, maybe encourage you to explore some new possibilities. And with photography, we do not always need to be so literal. Okay, before I get started in that though, it occurred to me a few years ago, I was wondering, why are we doing this? Who are we working for? Is it your fans online? Does the approval of others really matter to you? Are you doing it because you want to sell your work? What drives this and what made me really start thinking about this was one time my old partner, Denise, at Roadrunner, had asked me one time why I didn't like a particular photo that her significant other had posted. And I'm like, well, I haven't seen it yet. But he, I guess, Facebook with their algorithm or whatever hadn't shown it to me yet. And it had been up for like 2 days. And because the gentleman in question is a very, very good photographer, and I'm usually a huge fan of what he does. But it struck me that, he paused, like, why hasn't Don liked my picture? And so, that's just, one little thing. I thought, okay, well, are you doing this for yourself, or are you doing this because of that little endorphin hit you get, when you see people get likes? I mean, I know, it's nice to get likes. For me, the magic number is 100. If I get 100 likes on a picture, I'm like, wow, that went over really great. A lot of times with my abstract stuff, like I'm going to show you tonight, I never hit that 100 mark. It doesn't resonate with people as much as, shall we say, a picture of a beautiful waterfall or a beautiful sunset or whatever. I'm okay with that because I'm doing what I want to do to create the work that I want to create. Now, when I say will it sell, years ago we had access to a place called the Lanacoonian Silk Mill. I'm sure some of you have been there. At least I hope some of you have. The owners passed away, so it's no longer available to us. But a friend of mine, I asked him, I said, "Do you want to go to the silk mill with us this weekend?" He's like, "No, I don't think so. I just don't think I can sell that kind of work." And I'm like, "Yeah, but do you like taking it?" He's like, "Well, yeah, I like taking it." But he was just, I guess what was driving him is, could he produce work that would sell? I think that's great if you can sell your work. It's great when other people like your work. Nothing wrong with any of that. But I guess what I want to strive here is, please do this for yourself. I find that photography feeds my soul. I just enjoy the creative process and getting out away from, my daytime job where I have to be very analytical and logic based and stick to the facts and all that stuff. Photography kind of frees me from all that. So, and I hope it does with you as well. So, a couple types of photographers. Some people maybe are a documentary photographer, or their style more resembles a documentary photographer. They may be technically proficient, their compositions may be nicely arranged according to the rules, whatever those happen to be. It may be high quality work. It may be very objective in nature. And down at the bottom, I wrote unmolested by Photoshop. Occasionally, I still hear of some people that seem to think Photoshop's a bad word. Usually, these are folks that, were big into film photography or something like that. I view Photoshop as the digital darkroom, and it's and what we're creating here, and what I'm talking about is creating your work, your art. So, anyway. Now, a fine art photographer is hopefully going to go beyond the technical. Things become much more subjective. Maybe, you're seeking to convey a sense of place or convey a sense of emotion. That certainly goes beyond what would be considered documentary. You're creating an image, not just, maybe a capture of a moment. So, what type are you? Does it matter? I'd say no, it doesn't, as long as you're happy and you find joy with what you do. So, couple quotes. There's no must in art because art is free. That was Kandinsky. He was one of the early abstract artists around the turn of the 1900s. Freeman Patterson, a very well-known Canadian photographer, says it's not how we create our photographs that matters, but that we make them. So what's he talking about? The creative process and the joy and the I guess, shall we say, the self-validation that comes from that. Tony Sweet, he had a quote I liked a few years ago. It says, "It's not about depth of field, it's about depth of feeling." I was watching one of his lectures, and he was talking about lens babies and the selective focus nature of the lens baby optics. And it's true. It's about, what do you feel? I mean, does that photo pull you in? Does it grab you? Another great one is, gear is good, vision is better. The best camera system in the world will not take any better picture than your iPhone if you don't have the creative vision and the talent necessary to do that. And then if anybody speaks Latin, it's a Latin meaning that in matters of taste, there can be no disputes. I'd like to remind some people of that. Last time, I don't generally judge camera club competitions because people, we all put a lot of pride in our work, and some people don't always take the opinion of others well, and it's just this type of thing. What looks great to me may not look great to you, and vice versa. But as this says, in matters of taste, there can be no disputes. So what matters? Craft matters. You need to have a competent understanding of your gear, because then it frees you to create. You're not fumbling with your gear. I mean, case in point, I've been out, like for instance in Iceland, and the aurora comes out, and then there are photographers that are fumbling with their gear and not getting the shot. And I mean, for me, of course, it's two things that happen. Number one, I have to stop what I'm doing and help them, which is fine. That's what I'm there for. But for me, it becomes intuitive. if you really understand your gear, you know which button thing to hit. I mean, do you think a sports photographer, for instance, can fumble with their gear? If they fumble with their gear, they're going to miss the shot. They're not going to get the Sports Illustrated cover or whatever they're shooting for if they're fumbling with their gear. Passion, of course, we need this to create. And if you're not excited about your pictures, I can assure you no one else will be. It'll show. And then vision or pre-visualization. This is kind of a double-edged sword, and it's important to know when to have it and when not to be constrained by it. I think we're all probably guilty. I know I'm guilty of it. You'll go to an iconic spot and you'll be like, I want to get this shot while I'm here. And, you'll get that shot. Maybe it's the first shot you're going for, but don't be so obsessed about that you forget to be open to everything else that's coming into you that's there. There are other shots to be had. I think it can sometimes be beneficial. You go somewhere you've never been before, you've never taken pictures of it, then you're not influenced by what other people have done. Now, on the flip side of that, I teach light painting, and light painting is something where you have to have pre-visualization because you're outside working in the dark. You have to know what kind of composition you want. You have to know how you want to light it because you've got to do all those things. The picture won't create itself. The good Lord turned the lights out. You're working in the dark. You have to supply the light. And so in those cases, oftentimes you do have to pre-visualize. And I know when I've had people out with me, and they're watching me light paint, and then you end up showing them the picture the next day or whenever you put it all together, and they're like, wow, I had no idea it was going to come out like that. Well, it came out exactly how I wanted it to come out because I had it in my head first. So it's important to sometimes be able to pre-visualize and other times not be constrained by that and be open to it. Okay, creativity's hard work. It can be. It's easier for some of us than others, but I know I certainly see enough people that it's like you're like, wow, he's so creative, she's so creative, or whatever. But it's at the same time, it is something that we can all obtain if we just put in the effort. So don't be afraid of failure. I'll show you some examples of some of my abstract techniques that do not work out most of the time. But don't be afraid to fail. Practice can make perfect. I mean, if you have to learn from your failures, but then and the important thing is don't get discouraged. It's okay to to question yourself. A friend of mine, John Barclay, coined the term FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and I've heard him use that in his lectures a lot. And John's just an amazing photographer, but he talks about times where he questions his own ability or his own worth as a photographer, and I've certainly gone through that a number of times myself. And most recently I started doing portrait work in the last couple years. And I can tell you, for the first year or two, even though I was going to workshops and maybe winning the best picture of the workshop award from the participants, or, from that particular workshop by the instructor, and yet I was leaving the workshop going, I just don't know if I'm any good at this. So it's okay to embrace failure, and it's okay to question yourself. There we go. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I was a little ahead of myself. So what's abstract art? Okay, the Oxford Dictionary says that it's art that does not attempt to represent external reality, but seeks to achieve its effect using shapes, forms, colors, and textures. Another definition might be, abstraction indicates a departure from reality in depiction of imagery and art. This departure from accurate representation can be slight, partial, or complete. It's not an all or nothing concept. It exists along a continuum. So, brief history. Pablo Picasso created this image in 1909. It's mostly, while it represents, buildings and what looks like to me a smokestack and palm trees, but it's mostly made up of, shapes and colors. So, um, this is thought to be the first real abstract work. Kandinsky, I used one of his quotes earlier on, but although there's some debate in the art world about that, and since I'm not a master's or PhD in fine art, I'm not qualified to go there. So, is this an abstract? I think a lot of people would think it is. For me, and for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to say it's what I personally consider a near abstract. Yes, it's got some abstract qualities. For me, though, I'm making abstracts with camera movements and creating smooth blurs and things like that. But the only thing that's sharp is just that one little petal, and everything else just becomes soft and about color. And down inside a flower, and early in the morning with the dewdrops, or just something like this. I mean, I know people, some people would consider this an abstract. For me, there's lots of texture there. It's got the diagonal line cutting through, but it's probably not quite an abstract from my definition. But if it fits your definition of an abstract, that is entirely okay. Okay, reflections. This was at a car show, something nice and shiny, and used it to take a reflection, or ice crystals.
Don, quick.
Yes.
Your mouse is showing up right in the middle of your screen, and people are asking you to move it off to the side.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
I don't see the mouse in my view. So, okay. Is it gone now?
It's gone now.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay. So, anyway, ice crystals. Is that an abstract? Could be. Or in this case, a broken car window, all that texture, the color coming through behind it. Is that an abstract? Maybe. But here's where I'm going with abstracts. These shots, I'll use vertical motion. There's two, in question, are you guys only seeing my screen, or are you seeing the screen and me?
Just the screen.
Okay. All right. Perfect. I don't want to do all these animations, with my hands.
If you want them to see you, just tell me, and I can put you as a little figure off to the side.
That's okay. All right. But anyway, here I'm using vertical motion in a forest, and it's about lines and color. Okay, and this is a shipping crate or container I ran into in Iceland, and this wasn't the picture I envisioned when I saw it. I took this picture because I thought this will make a great representation of what it was before I introduced camera movement and created this. I find the blurry, soft picture much more appealing than the static, just the shot of the text, of the outside of the container with the blue stripe and the rust. Okay, coming off the Pennsylvania Turnpike several years ago, when we saw these red buds in bloom, and they were gorgeous. It's like, oh my God, we got to get off. We got to shoot those. And then, of course, when we got there, the scene's a little chaotic. It's messy. It's like in my mind's eye, I'm like, this is beautiful. But then when I go to do a composition, I'm like, it's not what I wanted. So abstract to the rescue. And to me, this picture becomes much more expressive of that scene than just the static shot. I'm always open to those static shots, but if they prove elusive, 1/15th, 1/2 a second, somewhere in there, move your camera up and down while the shutter's open, see what happens. And while I'm thinking about it, I sent you an email tonight with my handout for this program, and you can turn around and make that available to all the club members.
Do you mind if I share it on the Facebook page, or do you want me to just share it in our email?
Yeah, just share it in your email.
Okay.
That'd be great. Okay. So anyway, this is at Old Car City down in Georgia, the world's largest known collection of old classic automobiles. I think he's got about 4,000 of them. And I saw the side of this Mustang Fastback, and I mean, this is okay, but this is not the picture I was going for when I saw it. I thought this will make a great abstract, and so I think it did. That's a little bit tighter than the shot before, but it just becomes about the diagonal lines. To me, the leaves at the bottom almost start to look like flames coming up. Again, I find this, for me, much more expressive than just the static shot. This is a leaf on a big giant leaf I shot at Longwood Gardens. I don't remember the type of plant. This is up at Dolly Sods in West Virginia, end of September, early October. The ground is just covered with these wild blueberry bushes, and they turn this beautiful red. And while they're low to the ground, I'm just pointing down at the ground, looking at them, moving the camera up and down, and you get this. This is at Bombay. I think it was Bombay Hook. Went over to shoot snow geese one year. It was a cloudy day. The snow geese really weren't around. I look at this this pond that has these cattails near the edge that were kind of brown, and what you're seeing through this is the reflection of the gray sky in the water. So it just became the brown lines with the gray sky reflected in the water. So there is a use for a dull gray sky, and this is probably the only one I've ever found in like 15 years. But anyway, it's just another option. It's just, the trees are always great subjects for doing this, but there's so much more that we can find to do this. This is another one. It's just, except in this, the bottom third is actually a reflection of the scene in a lake. It was just a very still lake, and you can see it's a little darker along the bottom third because the lake, the reflection's a little darker than what's not being reflected, the main scene. And so that's where I'm just incorporating the reflection into the panning, or the swipe, I think might be called. This is the side of a building. I shot this on one of our photo walks. I think we were doing it in Old Town Fredericksburg. And a sunset, except this time I introduced just a little bit of jiggle into the vertical movement of the camera. And with the sun setting through the trees, to me, again, it looks like flames. I guess, believe me, I don't have a thing about fire, but I'm seeming to incorporate that or seeing that in my work sometimes. Another, these are the little clean forest scenes where you just have the vertical trunks. If you don't do this kind of work, it's a great type of thing to start. It's an easy way to get the hang of this type of work, and you just want to have good separation and spacing so that the image remains balanced. Okay, this is just some grass on the side of the road last fall, and the light hitting it was a little uneven. That's why some of it's darker and some of it's brighter. It was late afternoon light, and you had just a little bit of light kissing some of the tall grass. And just literally, this was on the side of a country road. The grass was like 2 or 3 feet tall, and introduced a little camera movement to it and got this.
Don, over in chat, Mary Lou asks, is this all camera movement, or is there an out of focus port?
No. Everything is camera movement. Everything is in focus, and everything is with camera movement. It wouldn't look the same if the scene wasn't sharp. It just, so yes. So I mean, I always have focus, and then introduce camera movement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yep. And this is the side of a little office building in Old Town Fredericksburg that again, on one of the photo walks, like I said, one of the things I really like to do is, photo walks in different locations around the, DC area, because, there's no particular goal. Let's just go see what we can find to take pictures of. I find them to be really good creative exercises. Okay. Some hay bales stacked up this past August. I went out to Palouse for harvest, and this is just the side of the road. They had some, hay bales stacked up, and, just again, a little bit of vertical movement, just shot from the side of the road. Last fall up in West Virginia at the top of one of the mountains, Spruce Knob, top of Spruce Knob, they were just various, basically, bushes and grasses and things growing on the side of the mountain, but the colors were beautiful, and thought, well, I bet that would make a nice abstract, and I think it did. The side of a building, it's a like a magenta colored building, and there was some grass and things growing up on the side of it, and I just saw the vertical lines and the corrugated steel on the side of the building, and I thought, oh, hey, there you go, let's see what happens if we introduce some vertical movement. So lots of options. Okay, now vertical's not the only motion, there's diagonal. Okay. This is the side of a hillside in Iceland. The neat thing about the mountains in Iceland is they just pretty much look like they just pushed straight up out of the ocean. And so you'll literally have the sides of some of these mountains are like a 45-degree angle, and the volcanic soil, or whatever, it's little rocky soil, it's just totally smooth, like no one's ever walked up the side of it. And anyway, in this case, the green is where there's a little bit of moss growing on the volcanic soil in with the black volcanic rock. And so I'm just doing a diagonal swipe instead of, one straight up and down. I'm moving the camera diagonally and achieving a different outcome. This was on the side of Interstate 95. They have these noise barriers on the side of the wall down around Occoquan. I'm going about 5 miles an hour in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and I'm in the right-hand lane. And so I just hung the camera, basically held the camera out the window on a low shutter speed, like 15th, 10th of a second, something like that, while I'm tooling around at, 5 miles an hour or so, and shooting these two scenes that is just the corrugated metal with lots of rust, and it really gave some interesting colors. Or Lens Baby, this top center is the only sharp part of it. I took my dog hiking in Shenandoah one day in the winter several years ago, and I just had one infrared camera with a Lens Baby lens. And so it's kind of a neat exercise because it forces you to just use that, because that's all you have available. And so, you have to use that. But again, it's a vertical swipe, but it's a different approach, because the only thing that's sharp and in focus is that top center, and then everything else goes soft and moves away. Nighttime photo walk up in Reston Town Center, if a memory serves me correct, and it's just, again, just a little bit of jiggle as I move up and down, and it's some type of sign at night, and it just ends up being, a beautiful display of colors. Okay, horizontal motion. This is where Mother Nature did not cooperate and did not give you the sunset you were hoping for. I like doing these swipes horizontally, and sometimes it's certainly better than a lackluster sunset, and that's what this was. This is the McKee Beecher's sunflower field at dusk. You can see the sky's got a little purple hint, to it. Then there's the green tree line, and then of course the sunflowers are just a sea of yellow. This is a canola field out in the Palouse, and the farmers, they grow things in really interesting patterns out there. I'm sure there's a method to their madness, but there was this green stripe. I'm not even sure what it was. It may have just been like a cover crop of some type, but then they had the canola growing on both sides of it, and the canola turns this, it's kind of it's not a very attractive plant until it blooms, and then of course you have all this yellow, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Um, but then I just thought, like a 200 millimeter lens, what happens if I introduce some movement? So it's shot in the middle of the day, bright sunlight, um, and with the movement. Here early morning along the Atlantic Ocean, this was probably Cape May. I'm not 100% sure, but you can see that the horizontal lines are um, the different waves coming in, and you just move side to side. So, you've got this, it's a very soft blue. It's the lines, it's just the hint of sunrise across the top. This is the one this is the uncropped version of the one I showed you guys at the start of this with the horizontal motion. And this was one of my first tours I led when we founded Roadrunner several years ago, and took the group up to the top of Spruce Knob in West Virginia, hoping for a great sunset. And it was not a good sunset. So it's like, hey, let's do some swipes and see if we can, get something out of this. And I think this was you know, a decent, I would have preferred a good sunset, but that was not bad either to have that. Okay. The rolling hills of the Palouse. It's for those of you that haven't seen or been to the Palouse, sometimes it's referred to as a high desert. The hills look a lot like sand dunes because they're kind of wind blown. The soil out there has the consistency of baby powder. And so, you have these rolling hills that are just all different shapes and everything. And so this is shot from Steptoe Butte with probably, I don't know, a 400 millimeter lens or something. And I'm just panning across the hills using a slow shutter speed. And it just, and you can get these patterns. And the thing is, for every one I'm showing you, there's a dozen pictures that of the same thing that just didn't have that magic combination of motion and balance. And that's where I say, you have to understand that you're going to get a lot of failures with this type of work, but I find the ones that work out to be really fulfilling. Okay, multiple exposures. A lot of the cameras now, this used to be a Nikon only thing, but I think a lot of the camera lines are having this now where you can do multiple exposures in camera. If you can't do it in camera, it's okay. You can still combine these as layers in Photoshop, but it's just where you're taking a picture, you're moving the camera incrementally up in this case. And in this case, it's a 10-shot multiple exposure. I do use a tripod for this type because I want the upward motion to be very precise, whereas a lot of the other, swipes and such are handheld. So this is a front of a train. I don't know if this was like some type of blade or something they used to clear snow or whatever, but it was the type of big blade on the front of a train. And you kind of look at it here and you go, well, what is it? I don't know. It's interesting. But then here's a 10-shot multiple exposure where I went in a circle around it. And I just find this particular shot a lot more interesting, a lot more compelling. I would rather have this hanging up on my wall than the one before it. But that's just me. This scene, this is Huntley Meadows Park in Alexandria, late afternoon. It's all right, but I found this shot where I did a 10-shot multiple exposure to be much more expressive than just the static shots. So this again is just 10 shots straight up and down, multiple exposure. Okay. You can do this with flowers. This particular flower is called a moonbeam. It opens at night. And so, right around sunset, a few minutes after sunset, before it starts to open, I'm just doing like 10 shots in a tight circle with basically a macro lens on it to do the same thing. So, or a coneflower. Again, this is, a macro lens. I'm on a tripod. I'm doing very small movements. In this case, I'm kind of doing, if you can imagine, like a tight little circle or a rectangle or something. It's not a straight up and down or a sideways. It's just kind of keeping in a little tight formation, but a little bit of movement in each of the 10 shots. The woodland scene again, same thing, woodland scene. So instead of a swipe where you have the smooth transition of colors with the 10 shot multiple exposure, you have the little texture, shall we say, from each shot where it's stacked up, on top of each other. Okay, this one I got to tell you, this is one of the first ones I did. This is from the parking lot at Blackwater Falls, and I posted this online, and a family relative looked at it, and she said, "That gives me a headache." And it's like, well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't give me one. So again, this is where I say, it's if you like this type of work, do it for yourself. Okay. Down in Charleston, Magnolia Gardens, I believe. And this is like a 30 shot multiple exposure. So we did, this was on a Tony Sweet workshop back in, was it 2006, something like that? Anyway, 10 shots, 10 shots, 10 shots. So 3 different exposures of 10 shot multiple exposures of the same scene. Then you overlaid them in camera to produce the final image. So now this is a technique where you're zooming while doing multiple exposures. This is a fishing net up in Cape May. And so I'm zooming out, but staying focused on that one little knot in the center of that fish net as I'm zooming out. Reflections. Okay, here's one where I'm showing you an abstract technique that's not representative of camera motion. But I did have to throw a rock in the water to create the ripples. So there was a little effort there. Same thing, just another, the trees on the shoreline were still in the sun. The water was in the shade. That's kind of the magic recipe for nice reflections. And then just standing on the shore, throwing rocks in, and and then of course taking pictures of the results. Here's you can see the rock went into the right center of the picture and how the lines radiate out, and then it breaks up the line of the 3 trees that are reflecting in the scene. And obviously this is fall color, and this is I was just up in Western Pennsylvania this past weekend, and the fall color is looking amazing. And I saw some pictures of, looked like somebody was up in Skyline Drive over the weekend. It is looking pretty good there. So we may have a really great fall for a change. I know around here a lot of times fall colors, not all, I find it a little disappointing, but this year may be a pleasant surprise for us. So Impressionism, just camera motion with some flowers. And in the handout, there's a book I referenced, Charles Needle, and he goes into extreme detail about the motion, how he sets up each shot. And I highly recommend his book if this type of work appeals to you. Just little circles, while I'm shooting flowers, and little arches. I'm just moving the camera like in a little tiny arch, and it's creating that look. Now this is called twisting and zooming. I'm focusing, and if you see in the bottom right third, there's one ring in these crab traps. I think these are crab traps that are. That isn't really moving much. It's staying basically the same. So what I'm doing is I take the shot, I twist the camera slightly, zoom in slightly, take another shot, twist in slightly, zoom in slightly, always refocusing or recentering like my focus point in the lens on that one circle. And then you can see, if you look at like the diagonal rod that goes across like basically the middle of the picture, you can see how it widens, and that's representative of basically that little bit of, I would say, 5 degrees of camera motion with a little bit of zooming, and that's your range of motion in that shot. This is a great technique for flowers. It's the same thing. You're just twisting and zooming in slightly with each shot, always recentering on the one flower that's going to be the dominant part of your picture. Now, this is just kind of zooming into the middle of something. I don't know that it makes a nice little zoom, but it's kind of lacking something right in the center. Here's a lone tulip in the middle of a bunch of pansies, an aster, which is kind of like a mum in the fall. Again, just it's all examples of the twist zoom technique. And this is twisting without zooming. I don't find the technique nearly as I threw this in because it's like, well, what happens if you twist but you don't zoom? The zooming, I think, just creates for more dramatic lines, as you're going into your subject. So it was like, yeah, I don't like that, so I don't do that anymore. Okay, this is back with a disappointing sunset, but this was okay because this was on a night we were going to go shoot star trails, and so we're the sun's not doing much, the color's not very exciting, but while I was holding my camera toward the setting sun, I just twisted it like 90 degrees as I shot the picture, and it just kind of created this circular with those lines across the bottom. And I was like, yeah, I'll take that. So now just straight zooming in, just another way it just becomes, a little more abstract in nature. Whoops. Zooming in on a Harley Davidson engine at a car show. The guy had like these little red LED lights on his engine, and it just kind of added a little something else. I'm sure you guys have heard the rule: if it's red, shoot it. Red's a dominant color, so it oftentimes makes for a good subject. Okay, in the forest, just looking straight up in the early spring. But not only do I want the lines of the trees, by zooming, I'm kind of throwing a little bit of motion, a little more tension, I think, into the image. Okay. This is one where I started in the top, in other words, the top left of the screen. This is some, I believe they're called begonias. And this was just a little, it was like an entrance to a neighborhood a couple miles from where I live. Oftentimes the apartment complexes, office complexes will have nice little small landscaped gardens that they have professionally done once or twice or whatever a year. And those can make great subjects. Yes, it's great to travel up to like Longwood Garden, and you've just got all this variety, but some of these little local things can be pretty awesome too. And anyway, this is one where I just thought, wow, I like those colors. I like how everything's planted. Pulled off to the side of the road, got my camera out. In this case, I'm zooming out, but zooming away. So I started the picture zoomed in essentially to the top left was my subject, but as I zoomed out, I panned away from that area, and it just so everything kind of emanates from that top left and streaks out. Okay. These are my absolute favorite type of this is my favorite technique. I learned this from Julianne Cost. She came to Nature Visions the first year she came to Nature Visions. She was showing one of her presentations was on this particular body of work that she had done, and I just fell in love with it. As soon as I saw it, I've got to, literally, this was the picture that I got the following weekend. Made my wife take me for a ride through the countryside. And of course, this was probably the only picture I got that weekend that was any good. Now, this is a type of technique where you're in a moving car and you're shooting out the window and you're trying to track the object. In this case, as the car's driving past this tree, I'm trying to remain focused and centered on the tree as the car's going by. So it's kind of like panning the subject from the car, except you're moving the camera so that you stay with the subject, not that you blow past the subject. Anyway, and of course, I always recommend that you have somebody drive you while you do this.
Quick question from
Yes.
the group, actually 2 questions.
Okay.
Someone is asking what your average shutter speed is for most of your images.
Okay.
And then someone else is asking what it says that exposure time and ISO examples would be helpful.
Okay. All right. ISO, I always like to shoot with the lowest ISO that's necessary to get the image. Okay, that means that there are times where, I mean, and you learn things the hard way. I was in the Smoky Mountains one time, and there was a cute little mama bear and bear cub not far from us, and I wanted to have good pictures so bad I wouldn't raise my ISO higher than 800. Now, this was probably like 10 years ago. When you start going higher than that and the pictures got really noisy really fast. The cameras today are much better with high ISO than they were then. But anyway, bottom line is I don't really have any good pictures of mama bear and baby bear because I was so worried about trying to maintain the quality of the image that I didn't let the ISO go where it needed to go. On the other hand, a friend of mine, Jack Nevitt, I was shooting with, he's definitely more experienced wildlife photographer. I'm not much of a wildlife photographer to begin with, but anyway, he basically had his camera on auto ISO. He knew what shutter speed he needed in order to have a sharp image. And so, yes, were his pictures a little noisy when you looked at them? Yeah, a little bit, but he had sharp pictures of mama and baby bear. So anyway, so the same thing with ISO. I mean, on these with a lot of this stuff, I mean, if I can have 100 ISO, 200 or whatever, and generally because I'm leaving the shutter open a longer than normal handheld period, you're going to have lower ISOs. So there's not a magic number with any of this except for shutter speed in this particular technique, and I will get there, I promise. But so with the ISO, though, like I said, use what you need to get the shot. And there are times where I will put mine on ISO because I know shutter speed or aperture is more important. Other times when that's not a concern, I lock it in at 100, 200, whatever the lowest that I can have, because it still holds true that, the whatever the native ISO of your camera is, if it's 100, 200, meaning that's what the sensor's designed to optimally operate at, is going to give you your lowest noise image. Now, back to shutter speed, aperture, etc. With the abstracts, aperture's not really a big deal because of the camera motion, you're getting more of it. Just becomes more about color or shape or something like that. So I'm not very picky about aperture, but in other words, I'll shoot when I do abstracts, I shoot in shutter priority, because what's important is the time that the shutter's open. So as long as the aperture is bouncing somewhere between like f2.8 and f22, I don't really care, because I'm moving the camera. I don't need a huge depth of field for what I'm working on. Whereas if you wanted to have like sharp near to far, then you need f16, f22, something like that, so you have a greater depth of field. That's not really an issue for this type of shooting. Now, as far as shutter speed, this is where you have to experiment and see what works best for you, because the variable is I can't tell you how fast you're moving your camera. In other words, it may take you, just say hypothetically, to do a vertical swipe of some trees. Maybe it would take you a quarter second to run through that motion, whereas maybe it would take me an eighth of a second. So, if I tell you the magic formula is an eighth of a second, you may not like the results you get with that. So what I suggest is that you use a variety. Again, if you put your camera on at shutter priority and take your shot, like usually you're going to be at least, like this particular technique I'm showing you, my formula is 1/15 of a second works best for this particular technique I'm just starting on. But if you're but with the handheld stuff, oftentimes it's more. It's an eighth of a second, a quarter of a second. Generally, not much more than a half a second. If you're hand holding a picture, or if you're hand holding a shot, 1 second is forever. While you're just sitting there, like moving it, whether you're moving it, trying to hold still, whatever your motion or you're trying to convey, that 1 second sometimes seems like an eternity. So I never have to go that far on something like this, but I would say somewhere between a quarter second to a 15th of a second is probably typical. You might have to go a little bit outside that, but again, you experiment, see what you like. Okay, so with these anyway, are we ready? Are we good to keep going on? Any question? Okay. All right. So anyway, with this, like I said, I was really excited when Julianne did this. I thought, I was just like, man, everybody's going to be beating feet to the countryside to shoot this kind of stuff. And I've seen I only know 1 or 2 people locally that really do this kind of work with any kind of regularity. So anyway, but it's really cool. But what's not cool is the 99.9% failure rate. And I'm not kidding when I say this. Somebody asked me, because I didn't used to include like this picture of just one that didn't work. Because they would say, well, these look wonderful, but you say you have a high failure rate. What do the others look like? Well, they look like this. They're a mess. They're not, the image doesn't balance, or maybe the part of it needs to be sharp isn't sharp, or it's just they're all different. And I'll shoot these on my D500 is my preferred camera for this type of work because it's fairly lightweight, and I'll put it on continuous low, which is like 5 frames a second at a 15th of a second. And maybe the first picture doesn't look good, the second picture doesn't look good, the third picture looks amazing, and then the fourth or fifth picture, as I'm blowing past a scene, looks horrible again. And you're like, wow, how does that happen? I'm moving the camera through this, and it's like click, 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 and only one of the 5 has any hope of being a decent shot. So it is the nature of it. It's how it works. With this type of work, sometimes cropping's a little bit is necessary. I really do not like my normal images. The only type of cropping I do is intentional cropping, where when I shoot the picture, I understand that I'm going to have to crop. If I go out and say shoot a landscape and get back home and go, yeah, I don't like it, but hey, if I do this major crop, I can salvage something out of it. I don't know. I just feel like, well, I didn't see that particular scene within the scene, and just don't like to make excuses for myself. So I'm not a fan of cropping generally, but with this, because you're literally hanging out most of the time the passenger side of the car at a 4-wheel drive or 4-door truck. So sometimes I'm hanging out the behind the driver's seat, whatever. But as I'm going by shooting this stuff, you just see the scene. You're like, hey, this is a nice group of trees, and you don't have time to compose with such accuracy that I know that, for instance, where I can see the blue sky peeking in through this picture on the top left, well, gee, I missed that, but I like the rest of the shot. So in that case, I find that I have to crop it a little bit. So sometimes cropping's necessary. Here's another one. It's harder to shoot them vertically held than landscape or horizontal. So most of mine are horizontal, but here's one that there are two that were shot, being held in portrait or portrait or vertical mode. Another one that dogwood in the spring, and this is just another scene with some roadside flowers. It just there's with this type of work, it's one of those things like I can't tell you what makes a good one of these. I just know it when I see it. It's just, to me, does the image feel balanced? Does the energy in the image feel right? It's obviously very subjective. So here's another one now. And again, people say, how do you do this? Where, the tree trunks are relatively sharp, but the foliage has this, huge amount of blur. I don't know. But, like I said, the camera's hanging out the window, and it's the way it works. They're all different, and you just, you have to take the successes with the failures. This is a early winter scene. There's some trees that don't drop their leaves in the winter. They just kind of hold on to the brown leaves. And then this is basically that same scene with that thing in the middle of a snowstorm. It's a different look. You can see in the foreground, everything's very diagonal, but then when you look past the foreground, you see like, hey, look at that trunk's, all the different tree trunks give the image some depth, and they're, fairly sharp, and yet, the ones in the foreground on the edges, there seems to be such movement. But, you just have to decide what does it work? Does it work as an image? I think this one probably does. In Death Valley, hanging out of the rental car, a little bit of scrub brush. I'm always, I don't know, well, I won't say I'm always looking for this stuff, but I always try to be open to it. And I think that's the big thing about photography, is just being open to what's around you. Don't, try to avoid the preconceptions when possible, and just be open. Fence line. And with the sky, I like doing this type of work on a cloudy day, because on a bright sunny day, I can't get my shutter speed down to 1/15 of a second. Also, the light on the trees or whatever I'm shooting is going to be kind of patchy and uneven. But with this, I had enough texture in the sky that it worked, that it was okay, because it breaks it up. It's just not like a solid sheet of gray. This one, probably my favorite one of all. I shot up on Skyline Drive a couple years ago, and it's so anyway. Now, if you like this kind of stuff, like, okay, say I shoot wildlife, so this stuff doesn't apply to me. Sure, it can. Here's back at Bombay Hook. This is one of my few wildlife abstracts. It's just some of the snow geese, and then I asked Denise Ippolito, if you guys have never had anybody present to your club, I can only assume she's fantastic. I love her work. So look her up if you haven't, and get Denise Ippolito, and she's, I'm sure she'd do it via Zoom or whatever. But anyway, she was kind enough to loan me 2 images to kind of fill this out a little more. But, here's a bird in flight that, she's got, looks like a 10-shot multiple or something. It's just stunningly beautiful. Or this grizzly bear, she's kind of painting the grizzly bear, but, you feel the energy and the water and everything. So, this, you can incorporate this stuff into other forms of photography, Now, this gentleman has a series that he calls Natural Dance. And
quick question before
yes.
we move on. Sorry.
Yes. Ask me.
Someone is asking, I presume when you say you're hanging out of a car that you are not driving.
I try not to. I won't lie to you guys and say that I've never done this when I'm driving, but here's the caveat. The only time that I've ever done this when I'm driving is when I am by myself on like a forest road or something that there's nobody in front of me, there's nobody behind me, so if I put my truck in a ditch, it's on me. And, I would not, shall we say, advocate driving down a country road with other vehicles or anything like that when in trying to drive. And like I said, and the optimal speed for that is like 20, 25 miles an hour. So it's not, I'm on the middle of a dirt road in the middle of the mountain somewhere, doing it. Other times, it's like if I can't recruit my wife into doing it because she's not a huge fan of that. I used to recruit Denise when she was my partner at Roadrunner. She did an incredible amount of driving, so I could do that. And then also, I live in a neighborhood with lots of college kids, and I've been known to pay the college kids to, hey, let's go for a drive for a few hours and I'll pay you. So they're like, oh, okay. So anyway, there's different options for getting drivers. Or if you have friends, I've had a number of people, I'll drive. If you want to do that, I'll drive. So you can let me drive, and, they're like, I'll come do it. And then we can switch or whatever. So there's lots of options for doing it, without, shall we say, being unsafe.
And then someone else asks, what percentage of your shots are handheld versus on a tripod?
It really depends. I mean, if we're talking about abstract stuff, I'd say 75% of them are handheld and 25% of them originate probably from a tripod. For my landscape work, in the last couple of years, I've gotten a little lazy about using my tripod, but I still, if it's early morning, late evening, like, for instance, I do a lot of infrared stuff during the middle of the day. The light's bright or whatever, but I still want to go out and make pictures, so I'm shooting infrared, and I'm hand-holding a lot of that stuff. You're out in the country somewhere, you find a beautiful barn with a horse standing in front of it or something. I just handheld that. But for any type of, early morning, late evening type of work involving landscape, it's all tripod. And I do recommend that you get the sturdiest tripod you can possibly afford, because I've got quite a collection by now, and it's just, you get this one, you're like, well, I really don't want to pay more than X for a tripod, and you get that tripod, and then you're standing on top of a mountain in a 15-mile-an-hour wind, and you realize you can't take a 2-second exposure of the sunset because your camera's vibrating because the tripod's not sturdy enough. So anyway, I do recommend sturdy tripods. Okay, we good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So this gentleman, Hal Eastman, loaned me a couple of his pictures to show that, even if you're into photographing people or whatever, well, you can add some camera motion and into that. Or in this case, it looks like the camera's probably fairly stable, but she's the one moving more so in that. So it's possible to even do a little bit of abstract work with people. So we can do it with people, we can do it with animals, and we can do it with things. So if you like any of this stuff and you want to learn more, here's where I recommend you go. If this Charles Needles book is about flower photography, and it is very, very detailed. You could not ask for a better book on doing impressionistic, as he calls it, or I would call it abstract or whatever, flower work. Charles is a great flower photographer. That's kind of his specialty anyway. And this book is highly detailed. I mean, the back of the cameras on every shot, what the settings were and how he set up the shot, how the tripod was. I mean, again, it's very detailed. So this is a very good book. And then the other one is David Duchemin's book, The Visual Imagination. And you can buy it in print, or used to be able to buy it in print. I know it's available as an ebook also. but both of these are listed in the handout that I already emailed you. But anyway, that's it. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let me see if anyone has any other questions. It is about 20 to 30 seconds behind, so we'll get to them here in a minute. I already asked if anyone had any final questions.
Okay.
And thank you so much for your great presentation.
You're welcome.
And it doesn't look like I'm getting any questions. I just want to give them a couple more minutes to catch up. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any further questions.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your awesome presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Don, for the great presentation on abstract photography. Join us next week for our digital photography contest with the theme of patterns. Reminder that Lewis needs all submissions by this Saturday at noon. Also, please join us Thursday, October 22nd for our club fundraiser at Brian Buru's in Severna Park. The menu has been emailed and placed on our Facebook page. Share the menu eat with your friends and family. $10 from every meal that is sold will be donated back to the club. Thank you and have a good evening. Good night.
All right. Thank you.